Okay, another sell-off, and we even got more good tariff news during the session. With an announcement out of the White House, a little bit more about that in a second, but we had the market again try to rally. It failed, and we went to new lows. Again, we're watching these 200 period moving averages at a boatload. I mean, you've got bottoming signals galore forming in the market right now, and the herd is so bearish. Herd is so bearish, it's bullish. Weren't bearish at the top, but boy, they sure get bearish at bottoms. Remember this. Remember this feeling in the air of negativity when we get the next rally to new highs on the S&P 500. They're going to get extremely bullish again, but then we're going to get the real top. Not going to think it's a top. The Dow dropped 1%, down 400 and almost 28 points. S&P closed down 1.78%, dropped 104 points. Closed at 57.39, rounding up. The S&P was down over 2% at the lows. NASDAQ was down over 3% at the lows, and then we recovered off of those lows. The NASDAQ down 483 points, down 2.61% at the close. It's down over 3% at the lows of the session. And the Russell down 1.63%. And the VIX, let me just move this over to make sure you can see this. The VIX up by 13.41%. That means the VIX right now is up 2.94. It was up to just under 25 at 24.87. The VIX is predicting in the next two trading sessions, once again, which it was right already, on the last bounce we got, it's predicting a bottom or a bounce in the next two trading sessions. That means on Friday or Monday, the VIX is predicting we could have a bounce or a bottom. The VIX was up over 13%, moves of greater than 10%. There's an 85% chance that in the next two trading sessions, based on the historical data, in the next two trading sessions, that the S&P will get a bottom or a bounce. I think you're going to see a bottom develop surrounding that 100. We did go to new lows, but I think you're in a bottoming process. And again, the herd bears are super bearish. And the crash is here. Here it is. Here we're all going to die. Herd is just, they've lost all hope. They are so bearish. The bearish sentiment is through the roof. The fear is through the roof surrounding the tariffs. And I told you what's going to happen. Now seeing that, we've seen that today. We saw it yesterday as we saw the pause on the tariffs with autos, and saw more concessions today from the White House. Rally with the pause on auto tariffs. Here we didn't get a rebound back up. We're going to get it. We're forming powerful reversal signals in multiple time frames. But the VIX is predicting that we're either going to bottom or bounce. And again, I think you're going to see a bottom surrounding our 200 period moving average. We tested it again today. Bitcoin tested it a couple times and it rallied up. If you want to see what's going on, all you got to do is look at Bitcoin. It's not moving to new lows. The market is following Bitcoin, which already made the bottom. Now, again, quickly, Trump walking back the tariffs that came into place on Tuesday on the 4th. Trump is saying that the goods that are compliant with the North American Free Trade Agreement will not face a 25% tariff, which he put into place on Tuesday on Mexican and Canadian imports. So warning you again, we're going to see something happen. We're now seeing it. Now, the market didn't rally on this like it did with the auto tariffs being delayed, but likely going to see something happen. We've got Powell speaking tomorrow. We've got the jobs report tomorrow. And we're going to be going forward with tax cuts. The market's going to be focusing on that in the near future, and it could forget about tariffs for a little while. We now have another pause on most of the tariffs. I've been warning you is going to happen. Told you either that or maybe they come to some agreement, and that's still possible. We've had a pause of those tariffs on goods compliant with the North American Free Trade Agreement during Trump's first term. And again, we've had a pause now till April 2nd. And this is the date being given for the reciprocal tariffs coming. We're seeing that directed at other countries that have tariffs on the U.S. and the European Union and so forth. We get a relief rally. I think we will. And see all of this, what I've been calling an inflation freak out, and you're already seeing it, which I've been predicting is going to happen. This is a preview of coming attractions. Could it be that we get the inflation data beginning to tick back up and the market's just losing it? We see herd and their heads just begin to explode. The market didn't rally on this like it did with the other pause with the auto tariffs. We had concessions. We get more concessions out of the White House today, which I've been predicting would happen. One date to continue to pay attention to is April 10th, when we get into the April CPI data. That's going to be a very important thing to be watching. That'll be the inflation report that we get when all these tariffs likely go into place, or maybe they're paused further and maybe there's other deals reached. We just simply don't know. Everything I keep telling you is going to happen is happening. The GDP went negative. We've seen the weakness with the jobs report. We're seeing the uptick with the CPI. Everything I've told you has happened. Before it happened, I told you this would happen. I'm telling you, we're going to get one final run up. Things are extremely bearish here. I've got people attacking me left and right. So I called the top, predicted this sell-off. We did go lower than I thought. The January low would hold. People tell me there's no way. This market is toast. Telling you, we're going to do what Bitcoin did and likely carve out a bottom surrounding that 200 period moving average with the S&P and NASDAQ. Now, just quickly, I am getting bottoming signals on a lot of indicators right here. Again, topping signal at the top here and right here. Had this sell-off. Support did not hold. The gap fill did not hold. We took out the January low, and now we're seeing at the 200 period bottoming signals develop here. If we rally and momentum back to bullish, very similar here. We had one here when it ended up rallying, but went a little bit lower and bottomed out there in January. Here it marked the rally just before the election. Get something like this where you get a signal and you go a little bit lower, or get this signal and go a little bit higher, but other times it's marked turning points as well. Had that signal yesterday, went a little bit lower today. Could we be carving out a bottom here? If we do, we'll have to flip momentum bars back to blue, back to bullish, and try to find and carve out a bottom around our 200 period moving average. S&P daily here. And by the way, these are the same bullish signals that formed on Bitcoin when it hit its 200 period moving average. Just quickly, the S&P has dropped over 7% now. Likely going to witness a bottom surrounding the 200 period moving average again. The trend direction right at the center line here, still right here in the positive region here. It's probably going to mark a bottom surrounding our 200 period moving average. We're right at the trend line here for the volatility oscillator. And again, we're still below the signal line. We've sold off 7%. We're still below the signal line. You got to get back above the signal line, break out here, see this go negative. If we're going to see the bottom fall out of the stock market, so far, the 7% sell-off hasn't been able to do it. Here, again, when we saw the 2022 peak, we went negative and we stayed there, and we saw volatility go above the signal line and remain there. Volatility with the 2022 sell-off, we sold off, and the trend direction remained negative. We don't have that at the moment. So again, could we witness a bottom? I think there's a very strong possibility that could be the case. We have topped. I'm going to know it because these things are going to go bearish, turn bearish, and remain that way. Momentum remains negative again after we had the peak. I told you that we saw a reversal of conditions. We've seen everything red, reflecting the momentum, taking now out the January low, just moving slightly below that. And here we are at the 200 period moving average. Again, I told you we could see a green awesome oscillator bar before the weekends here or early next week if we try to bottom surrounding our 200 period moving average. I think you got a good shot that could be the case. Now, we've become very, very oversold. You're likely going to see green awesome oscillator bars. You're likely going to see attempted rebound. In order to get a bigger recovery, we got to flip back to a green cloud, blue bars, and get a bullish reversal of conditions. We're about to get a bearish alignment of the 10 and the 20 dropping below the 50. The 10's already done it. When we had that over here in this sideways move, that's where we bottomed out at, right when we got that bearish alignment. So again, could we bottom at this key support area? Think there's a good chance. Maybe we go a little bit lower, but you've got, and maybe those divergences aren't quite done on the 60-minute charts, but they're likely going to come to a conclusion if they're not done already. Those 60-minute charts that we're looking at in this video and yesterday. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, please take a moment to think about supporting the channel. Have any sponsors, just a direct relationship with you. Again, we've got a sloppy inverted hammer right here. It could be a bottom with that, or go a little bit lower if we haven't completed those divergences. I'll be watching to see if we get any green here. But again, bearish sentiment with our failed breakout. We'll be watching to see if we can turn it around, if we can get some kind of rebound off of the 200 period moving average. NASDAQ daily chart here. A couple of days ago, we had the VIX correctly predict that we were going to get a bounce or bottom. We got a bounce. We saw the rally with the auto tariffs being paused. We saw that rally. Now the VIX jumps, as we see the sell-off in the market, the VIX jumps up by 13.41%, but the VIX is not moving to a new high. Not moving to a new high, at least so far. We're making a slightly lower high. But on the price labels here, you can see that our peak was at 26.35. We were below 26 today at the highs at 25.92 and closed under 25 at 24.97. Still, we closed higher by 13%. The VIX is predicting we're going to get another bounce or bottom. And this time, last time it was a bounce. This time it could be a bottom. The VIX has been nailing it with the signals. Not always right. It's only an 85% chance we're going to get a bounce or bottom in the next two trading sessions. I want to continue to point out we are doing exactly what Bitcoin did. Came down to the 200 period. Bitcoin has already bottomed. I told you I thought that the S&P had bottomed, filling the CPI gap right here. Now, I correctly called the top, correctly predicted the sell-off, but I told you we're either going to try to bounce at the trend line of support that failed over here, or come down to try to fill this gap. And that would be the scenario, a higher low scenario. If we took out the January low, we didn't stop at the 78.6 Fibonacci, can go beyond the January low and hit the 200 period, which is this black line right here. And again, I talked about those scenarios. Up at the top, I talked about the different possibilities for the L8 wave count. Did we have a wave 4 completing at the January low, or is it not done? And again, it's not done, but we're still going to be followed by new highs. Yes, I still think the market's going to top out. I think we're going to have a bear market. Still think we're going to see a massive crash. Likely be kicked off by a 20% crash like the other recessions once we peak out, but I don't think that this is the peak. We're hitting the 200 period. We're hitting major horizontal support right here, and I think you're going to carve out a bottom in this area. Tomorrow we got the jobs report. We got Powell. We're seeing the shrinking of the federal government. We're seeing layoffs and people being fired. And again, the shrinking of the government is associated. It's what you see right before a recession. Eventually, that's going to work its way into the jobs report. Whether it shows up tomorrow or not, we'll see. But you're at a confluence of support. We have more support right here. You're at this October low for that pullback, and you've got the November low just before the election there. So you've got this confluence of support, VWAP support down right here, the 200 period moving average, and then you've got multiple point bullish divergences on the 60-minute charts. But I wanted to show you this right here. We've now dropped failed breakout, dropped over 7% on the S&P 500. Coming back to this major support. Now, if we rally back up, as I've said, if we begin to rally back up, or go a little bit lower and try to rally back up, again, you're going to hear about a head and shoulders. Again, maybe this whole thing being a left shoulder or head formation here, and then a right shoulder, or with a slanted neckline, or whatever the case may be. This is what the bears were telling us back over here where we had a head and shoulders, and I told you it was a fake pattern, and it was going to evolve into the bull flag. It ended up doing that. We ended up going to new highs. Again, likely not going to play out. And again, you'll probably rise up and head and shoulders, and it'll pull back, and then so we're going to get the first wave of minor wave 5, the first wave 1 and 2, and that's going to cause everybody to believe, it's a head and shoulders, and then we're going to get the wave 3, and we're going to bust up through this area and go towards the upper channel line. Now, again, if you want to see what's going on, the S&P, all you got to do is look at Bitcoin. It's already done this. It's following Bitcoin. Let's follow the leader. And again, Bitcoin already bottomed out. It got a higher low and had testings here a couple of times. Then it has moved off of those lows. All kinds of bullish signals on Bitcoin. We're likely going to see the S&P follow suit. I just want to continue to point out this major confluence of support here on the S&P 500 and this testing of the 200. And again, maybe we test it more, but divergences on the 60-minute chart, on the 30-minute chart, those divergences are going to play out, and we're likely going to see a big rally either Friday or Monday going into next week. Now, again, the VIX is predicting we're going to have an up day either Friday or Monday, and again, that could be a bounce or bottom based on the VIX, 85% chance. Now, we could go lower, but I think that there's this testing going on right here, and again, Bitcoin dropped below the 200 period, but then rallied back up above it, which is what we saw the S&P do today. The previous test of it, we didn't go below it. Today we did. So again, I think that it's following exactly what Bitcoin is doing. I just want to show you Bitcoin. Again, if it's not your thing, that's okay, but it is what the S&P and the stock market is following. And again, it followed Bitcoin down to take out the January low. And again, we bottomed out at around that 200 period moving average, had a test of it. Look at right here. Did exactly what the S&P did. Tested it, came back up, rallied, and then it tested it and it dropped below it. That's exactly what we just had happen with the S&P 500 today. It dropped below it, but then it didn't close below it. We got that bottoming tail with Bitcoin. Bitcoin had a big rally. We had the announcement. Trump announced the crypto strategic reserves, and we had this big old rally with Bitcoin. Went up like 13%, something like that, and then it pulled back for the higher low. And look, we got another test right here. Now, I don't know if S&P will follow that exact same blueprint, but Bitcoin got another bottoming tail, got that hammer, and then now it's come back up to the 20-period moving average. And again, I think that we're seeing with Bitcoin leading diagonal. I think Bitcoin will eventually take out this trend line right here, and if we do, we'll see the S&P rally off the 200 and eventually try to break its downward trend line as well. So all kinds of bullish bottoming signals on Bitcoin down here with this low and then this low. I see that in all likelihood on the S&P 500. Bitcoin got that bullish MACD cross with the session we have today, which is not over, for the Thursday session. With our sell-off to the 200, and again, remember the institutions watch the 200 period moving average. We're going to see some great interest there in all likelihood. The greed index is at extreme fear. We have currently a reading of 7 AAII sentiment survey, and it came in, again, extremely bearish. Last week we had the reading at 60.6. That was the 1-year high for bearish sentiment. And again, not too much better, a little bit better, but not too much. 57.1 this week. The percentage of bulls dropped, though, further, 19.3. It was at 19.4. This is what you have bottoms form. You have this happen. As I said earlier, sentiment is so bearish, it's bullish. Now, quickly, the S&P 500, it dropped down below the 200 period today, moved to a new low, but it didn't close there. NASDAQ did. And I was watching to see, would they diverge? Sometimes they diverge at tops and bottoms, and they still may do it if we end up going a little bit lower. But you got a possible bullish falling wedge developing on both of them. And again, if we end up rallying back up here, everybody's going to be screaming. All the people that are telling us there's no possible way we're going to rally, if we bottom out here or go a little bit lower and bottom out and come back up here and move back towards the 50-period moving average, towards the 100-period moving average, and come back up to the cloud, everybody's going to go head and shoulders, head and shoulders. And again, because we moved a little bit higher here, they're going to say head and shoulders, and it's likely going to be that we're going to get this wave 1, wave 2, these subwaves of minor wave 5, and then we're going to bust up higher and go towards the trend line that I've been talking about in the weekly time frame. We went sideways for months now, reaching that upper channel line. It's still likely we're going to reach it, and I think you'll see bullish sentiment return, and we'll move out of this extreme fear environment that we're in. Told you about this divergence and the divergences on the 68-minute charts, the 30-minute charts, and so forth, the 15 right here in the more recent price action. When we hit this level here and we turned off of this trend line, I talked about the failed breakout on the S&P and the NASDAQ 100, and that's given us this drop. I was watching the trend line from the 2023 low. We violated that level. I was watching the gap fill from back over here. We violated that. We took out our 100-period moving average, our January low, and moved down to the 200-period moving average. We just moved slightly below this level. And again, we're likely doing what Bitcoin did and trying to carve out a bottom surrounding that 200-period moving average. Now, I correctly predicted the day of the top here, as I did over here at these other peaks. Told you over here, we end up getting a pullback. Told you here, I called the day of the top here, called the day of the bottom here. Predicted that we would bottom out at that trend line. We did. Predicted the day of that on January 13th. Did that on the 9th and 10th. Predicted the election rally, and I think you're going to see the same thing. We have this confluence of support here, okay? Been talking about at our 200-period moving average. And again, if we draw a parallel boundary to the upper boundary here, again, it's just a little bit lower. S&P turned off these technical levels of support, this trend line right here at the November and December top, this trend line right here at this January and February top. Here at the 200-period moving average, we have another trend line that I'm watching, and that's the trend line right here from the November gap right here, connected to that pullback right there, that pointed to the January low. Could this be pointing to the next low if we go a little bit lower and that intersects with this trend line? I don't know. We'll see what happens, but you have support here. I think this horizontal support is likely going to hold that I've been talking about and showing you on the different charts. Told you back up at the top, predicting we were going to get a sell-off. I told you I thought we'd test this trend line, fill the gap with the CPI. Broke the trend line, and the CPI gap was at the 78.6 Fibonacci. We broke that level, take out our January low. We've come a little bit lower. So again, we went a little bit lower than I thought, but I did predict the sell-off, did predict the peak. Correctly warned you about the bearish divergences. Now we have multiple points of bullish divergences, the opposite of what we had at the peak. So you're likely going to witness a bottom here, and then I think we're going to complete minor wave 4, either here or just a little bit lower, and then I think you're going to get this minor wave 5, and then I think that will complete the blow off top. But this is what I think is happening. Got a little tiny bullish divergences that are developing here on the RSI that could give us a bottom here. And we do have multiple points of divergence on the 60-minute chart. MACD is still negative, but the stochastic has become very, very oversold here and forming a little bullish divergence here in the more recent price action with our first test to that 200-period moving average. So I think you're going to bottom surrounding the 200-period. The institutions watch the 200-period moving average, and I think we're going to see a rebound. It's coming back to the 200, forming that bullish falling wedge type of a pattern here. See if we try to bottom as Bitcoin did around its 200 period, then break out of this bull flag pattern, this bullish falling wedge pattern. I warned you about the negative divergences on February 19th as we were slamming up into that trend line. We ended up getting the failed breakout. I talked about that. Once we got the sell off the very next day, we talked about not being able to get confirmation of the breakout. Divergence has played out and have given us a sell-off. Now here on the 30-minute chart, again, we've got multiple points of divergences. So far, they've just given us these counter-trend rallies so far. And again, could we now have a bottom? It is multiple point divergences that produce a reversal. Now the MACD has moved lower, 30-minute chart on the 60-minute chart, but now you're forming a divergence on both. So again, could we be witnessing a bottom. It may not be done yet. We still may go a little bit lower to the trend lines I'm showing you on those other charts, but it's possible we either get a bottom here or go a little bit lower and try to carve out a bottom if the VIX is correct and we get some kind of rebound. We'll see what happens. I mean, you've got the jobs report before the market opens. You've got Powell speaking. Powell will be speaking 12:30 Eastern time during the market session. Next week, we're going to get the CPI. Could it be, we had that hot CPI report, could it be, market ended up shrugging it off, but could it be we end up seeing the inflation report come in okay, cool, and the market rallies on that? That's going to be next Wednesday, so we'll be watching that. Then you're going to get the wholesale inflation following day. I don't know if we get a delay with further increases with the CPI, but I do think the CPI is going to go higher, and that's why I'm watching that April 10th report that's going to be coming in around when supposedly the tariffs are all going to be kicking in now. Watching, but next week we'll get the CPI and the PPI wholesale inflation there. But if it does come in cooler next week on Wednesday, that could spark a pretty big rally. So we'll be watching that. Should we try to climb above and bounce off of our 200 period and begin to claw our way back up? At these divergences, and again, I think the multiple point divergences here are going to begin to play out. You got it on the 30-minute chart, you got it on the 15-minute chart, and here's the divergence I warned you about at the top as we're slamming into that trend line with the failed breakout on the daily chart. Now you got these multiple point divergences as we're slamming into major support at the 200 period and horizontal support. So again, I think you're going to try to carve out a bottom. Maybe we dip a little bit lower, but I think you're going to carve out a bottom. And it could have been today if the VIX is correct. Get a rally on Friday or Monday. We'll see what happens. The strongest signals, these multiple point divergences, the 30-minute chart, the 15-minute chart, then here on the 60-minute chart. And again, it was this negative divergence that I told you about on the 19th that created the top and the sell-off. We had a failed breakout of this trend line right here. We turned off at this trend line right here, and failed breakout in the daily time frame. That's taken us down below the 200, and then below the 50, the 200, and then the 50 across the 200, and it's been acting as resistance with this trend line. We now have multiple points of bullish divergence. If you have a quadruple bullish divergence, that is the strongest reversal signal in technical analysis. A triple and quadruple bullish divergence or bearish divergence, those are the strongest signals in technical analysis. Those produce reversals. Could be it's not quite done. We'll see what happens if we dip a little bit lower. But again, you are carving it out here. It may be putting the finishing touches on it, or it may be done. But again, we'll be watching. We're oversold on the stochastic here on the 60-minute chart. You're carving out a divergence. The MACD's gone lower, but you've got that multiple point divergence on the RSI there, which again could carve out a bottom here or just a little bit lower at those trend lines I've been talking about earlier in the video, directly below. And again, that's in our support zone. So we'll be watching. But again, I think these divergences will play out. And if you look at this, again, you can see they've done an amazing job of calling turning points over and over again on the S&P 500. In addition to the bullish divergences that are forming and that bullish divergence between the S&P and the VIX is not moving to new highs, often tops before the S&P bottoms. But the S&P's moved to a new low. The Russell is not moving to a new low. Russell's testing its 400 period moving average. Got a hollow red candlestick a couple of days ago. It got a higher low today. So again, sometimes the S&P and Russell diverge from one another. We'll be watching. Russell daily chart here. Now listen carefully. NASDAQ's doing the same thing. It has multiple point divergences that are developing. What gave us the January low? Listen carefully. They may not be done yet. We may say we get the jobs report, say it comes in bad, but then we gap lower, rebound, and say we get a big rally with Powell or something like that. Or if we bottom out, just end up gapping higher, and this marks a bottom. We'll be watching to see what happens. But you got the divergence here, triple bullish divergence now developing here on the MACD. You got the same thing up here only it's a quadruple bullish divergence developing just like the S&P 500 on the RSI here in the 60-minute time frame. So a good chance you're going to try to get some kind of bottom, may go a little bit lower, but when if we do go lower and we get a gap and trap and we start to rally back up after the jobs report, or we get a relief rally and the jobs report isn't so bad. We are seeing layoffs and in the federal government, the workforce is shrinking, and that's eventually going to show up in the jobs report. I don't know if it shows up in this one, but it's going to show up in the not too distant future. Get a relief rally with that and maybe the CPI next week. Do we see those same things begin to rattle the market in April when we get the next jobs report, early April, and on April 10th, the CPI data? Watch these divergences. Again, you've got bottoming signals galore are forming over the place. S&P and the NASDAQ 100. NVIDIA could go a little bit lower to that lower channel line. It didn't quite reach it yet, and that could take NASDAQ a little bit lower. But we'll be watching to see, does this divergence end up, and again, like I said, it may not be done yet. We may see the RSI come down a little bit further. This may not quite be done yet. We'll be watching, but could we see a bottom develop? NASDAQ's taken out the trend line from the August low connected to the January low right here, the blue trend line. We took it out. And again, we came back to this gap right here from the CPI. We took that out. And now we've come back and have filled the election rally gap right there. And we're at our 200 period. Watching to see if NASDAQ would move lower or if it get a higher low, if it would diverge from S&P. They sometimes do that at turning points. Back over here at the July peak, and we've seen it other times as well. Like in December, at the December top, S&P peaked before the NASDAQ. Sometimes they diverge from one another. Turning points. The 2022 top. Can we see some kind of bottom or drift a little bit lower and see some kind of bottom develop? And I say that because NVIDIA is right, that has that channel line right below it in the daily time frame. We were down 5.74%. And we've seen this drop now from the gap fill of 23.5%. Do we end up going a little bit lower here? Sometimes NVIDIA diverges from the NASDAQ. NASDAQ moved to a new high over here in July. NVIDIA peaked over here in June, and they diverged at that point. Sometimes they do that. So we'll be watching this trend line right here on NVIDIA. You do have a nice falling channel here on NVIDIA. Recovers, I'll be watching to see if it gets back above the 200 period or not. If the 50 continues to decline, you could see a death cross with NVIDIA between the 50 and the 200 period moving average. With this divergence right here, we have this potential channel, or if we exclude the shadow from 3 sessions ago, you got a possible bullish falling wedge. So again, we'll see what happens. But again, possible bullish falling wedge on the S&P and the NASDAQ here. Again, we've got possibly an inverted hammer, a sloppy one, but it is a possible pattern. You got the candle of indecision with the spinning top here. Here we had a rally. We are in positive territory, and we gave it all back, drop below the 200 period, and you get this body right here. Usually it's a smaller body. That's why I say it's a sloppy pattern, but it is a pattern. It is an inverted hammer. Watching to see, does that give us a reversal surrounding this level? So watch those bullish divergences on the 60-minute charts. And again, they're all over the place. 30-minute chart, 15-minute chart, we'll be watching. And again, we're very, very oversold here. MACD is negative. Again, these divergences did play out and give us a big sell-off. 7% on the S&P, about 10% here on the NASDAQ. And again, I talked about the failed breakout here, back up at the top there on the 19th.